In this day and age, we're exposed to two major schools of thought when it comes to our responsibility toward the world in which we live. I'm talking about the natural world, the environment, as it is popularly called. One school of thought basically turns the world and the earth, the universe, into an idol. The animals, the trees, the ground, the planet itself, all of it has become an idol that people worship, that somehow humanity is not just in charge of it, they are subject to it and must worship it. The other school of thought is that the world isn't our home and we're going to heaven anyway. The material world in the end doesn't matter, therefore we can neglect it all we want. After all, the earth takes care of itself anyway. Those are two extremes of how we look at it. But what is the correct way to look at it as far as the Bible is concerned? And that's what we're going to look at in this message. What does the Bible say about our responsibility toward the earth? In other words, is there such a thing as Christian environmentalism? I think a good place to start would be Psalm 24, verse 1, where it says, "The earth is Yahweh's, and all it contains, the world, and those who dwell in it." He seconds that in Psalm 89, verse 11, where he says to God, "The heavens are yours, the earth also is yours. The world and all it contains, you have founded them." So what these verses basically do is place that ownership squarely on God. He hasn't abrogated it at any point. He has made it. He has placed it in motion, and he is its owner. Nowhere in Scripture do we see that it belongs to anyone else. So where do we fall into this? Well, if we take a look at Genesis 1, verse 27, it says, "God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" What's he talking about here? He's talking about taking dominion. It is our task to take care of his creation. We are his stewards. A steward is somebody who cares for the property of his master. As stewards, we are expected to take care of God's property. What does he own? According to the psalmist, he owns everything. The world and the fullness thereof, everything in it, belongs to him. Therefore, our responsibility as human beings is to care for it as a servant would care for his master's property. That's pretty sobering. If we've been neglecting it in any way, we're going to answer for it. So what is expected of us? Well, let's start with the land. In Leviticus 25, verse 23, he very plainly says, "The land is mine." There's no two ways around it. The land, the earth, the dirt on which you are standing right now or sitting, where my house is built, where your place happens to be placed, it is his. And we need to take care of it. So how do we take care of the land? Well, that's a pretty big question, especially for those of us who farm. So what should a farmer do to take care of the land? What should a tiller of the earth keep in mind when tilling the land? One thing that God places very high on the list is the land Sabbath. Leviticus 25, verses 1 through 7, it says, "Yahweh then spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, 'Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall have a Sabbath to Yahweh. 6 years you shall sow your field. In 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in its crop. But during the 7th year the land shall have a Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to Yahweh. You shall not sow your field nor prune your vineyard. Your harvest after growth you shall not reap, and your grapes of untrimmed vines you shall not gather. The land shall have a sabbatical year. All of you shall have the Sabbath products of the land for food, yourself and your male and female slaves, and your hired man and your foreign resident, those who live as aliens with you. Even your cattle and the animals that are in your land shall have all its crops to eat. When he's speaking of a land Sabbath, he's talking about not tilling, not planting, not harvesting. The land is allowed to rest. You can eat whatever happens to come up on its own, but you are not allowed to cultivate, to give the land a chance to rest. If you don't allow the land to rest, it's going to deplete. And that's why we've been forced as a society, our farmers are forced to load the land up with all sorts of fertilizers, most of which are artificial and harmful. So they are hurting the land. What are the consequences of not observing the Sabbath? Not only is the land depleted and our task made more difficult, and we're forced to resort to more and more drastic means of keeping the land fertile, but then he starts talking in chapter 26, the next chapter, about what will happen to the people if they fall away from his commandments. And one of the things that he promises when the people ignore his law is removal from the land. And that's exactly what happened to the Israelites. Remember, they fell away, the 10 tribes were removed, and then after a while, even Judah and Benjamin were removed as well and carried off to Babylon. We can read about what God had to say about this in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verse 21. They were carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and to his sons and to the rule of the kingdom of Persia, quote, to fulfill the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days of its desolation it kept Sabbath until 70 years were complete. The Judahites were removed from the land long enough for the land to make up for all the seventh year Sabbaths that they neglected to give the land. Now, what about taking care of animals? Remember in Genesis 1, we were told to rule over the animals, over the creatures that he'd created. As his stewards, ruling over his creation, are we not expected to treat those animals as if they're his? Doesn't that require us to be responsible and kind and thoughtful of them? Should we not regard their lives? According to Proverbs 12:10, a wise man regards the life of his beast. In other words, he takes care of him, makes sure that animal is fed and sheltered and taken care of. But does this just apply to domestic animals? I don't think so. My argument is because we have been made to rule over all of God's creation, this includes the wild animals as well. So we shouldn't neglect them. We shouldn't hunt them to extinction. We should always make sure that the forests are maintained. We should make sure that the animals aren't suffering from our own actions, such as spilling toxins into the rivers or spraying chemicals onto our land or in the air or letting trash destroy the land over which we've been made rulers. The animals suffer as well. So if something is harmful for the wild animals, we should refrain from doing it. Remember, here's the irony of a lot of this. We are called to preserve what God has created. Another word for preserving is conserving. A lot of people who call themselves conservatives are not conservative at all when it comes to taking care of the land over which they've been put in charge by God as human beings. They are neglectful in many ways, saying, well, we're just going to heaven anyway, it doesn't matter. Or, well, the earth takes care of itself. No, the earth does not take care of itself. We have been placed here to take care of the earth according to God's parameters. Not to take it so far as to worship the earth, but to be mindful of it and to do our parts to make sure that it's healthy and maintained. Deuteronomy 20, verses 19 through 20 make this very clear. He's speaking here of warfare. And when a siege is being placed, he says you can go ahead and cut down trees for your siege ramps or whatever. But when it comes to the fruit trees, leave them alone. He says when you besiege a city a long time to make war against it in order to capture it, You shall not destroy its trees by swinging an axe against them. For you may eat from them, and you shall not cut them down. For is the tree of the field a man, that it should be besieged by you? Only the trees which you know are not fruit trees you shall destroy and cut down, that you may construct siege works against the city that is making war with you until it falls. We're allowed to use the non-fruit trees for whatever, for building, for construction, war or peace. But we are also expected to make sure that the fruit trees are untouched and taken care of. Now, is God saying that we can go ahead and cut down every single pine tree and oak tree and maple tree that might be in our way? No. You see, what God is saying here is He's not allowing for scorched earth policies and warfare. When we're completely obliterating the land, there's a problem. That's preservation. That's conservation. That's making sure that we're being responsible. If we're completely wiping things out, whether for warfare or peaceful endeavors, including industry, then we've got a problem, and we're neglecting that over which we've been placed in charge. Another issue that comes up when we look at this topic is hybridizing. Almost every farmer you look at out there has hybridized crops. Well, it makes the plant stronger. It makes it more resistant to disease or pests, they argue. Well, what does God have to say about that? Leviticus 19:19 says, "You shall not breed together two kinds of your cattle or livestock. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor wear a garment upon you of two kinds of material mixed together." What he's talking about is hybridizing, the mixing of two different species. This includes beefalo, mules. It also includes the crops that we grow in our fields. Almost all our corn is hybridized. Almost all of the seeds that you buy at the store for planting, unless they're heirloom seeds, are hybridized. What are we doing when we do this? Well, God obviously felt very strongly about this. First of all, when you hybridize, you're wiping out the original species. You're not allowing the original species to perpetuate. What you're doing is creating a Frankenspecies that is a splicing together of two species that were never meant to be together in the first place. And again, these plants require different means of care, including pesticides and chemicals, more hybridization. God has made it very clear that we are to preserve and conserve what He has created the way He created it. Hybridizing destroys. Without regard for the animals which He's created, we're neglecting our duty. Neglecting the Sabbath for the land, the seventh-year Sabbath. It makes the land suffer. It's depleted. In neglecting all these commandments of God, we neglect our duty as stewards. One day, all these laws will be placed in the forefront of society when Christians finally take over, when Christ's dominion is full. And the earth is groaning and waiting for that. Paul the Apostle said so. In Romans 8, verse 22, he says, "For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now." The earth, all of creation, the land, the animals, everything that God has created is suffering. Waiting, as he states in verse 19, for the revealing of the sons of God. In that day, when Christians finally can establish the kingdom in its fullness, here on earth as it is in heaven, we will be in charge and be able to implement these laws, and the earth will rejoice. It will be freed. It will no longer groan, and the earth is waiting for that day. So let's press for it. Let's push for it. Now, if we're going to say, well, that's all well and good, but I just don't believe that, or it's inconvenient for me, I have to hunt down heirloom seeds instead of hybridized seeds, or, I don't want to stop spraying pesticides, or, well, that's all well and good, but it's just not convenient for me. Or maybe it doesn't fit your eschatology. Okay. Let me leave you with a final thought. Revelation chapter 11, verse 18. Quoting the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God, they're speaking to God and worshiping Him. And they say, and the nations were enraged. Think of Psalm 2. And your wrath came, and the time came for the dead to be judged, and the time to reward your bondservants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, the small and the great, and to destroy those who destroy the earth. God gave us the rules for preserving and conserving His creation as stewards. When we neglect our job as stewards and His rules for stewardship, we're doing nothing else but destroying His creation. And God will destroy those who destroy His creation because they were evil servants. They were not good stewards. He'll turn us away and said He never knew us because we neglected our job as His servants and stewards of His creation, which, by the way, shows no sign of going away. And whether you believe it's going away or not, whatever your eschatology on this may be, think about this. Would you rather be caught on His return actively destroying or neglecting His creation, or working very hard to preserve it?